Hello, my name is Azim Manji, and I am the International Urban Planning Specialist on the pre-feasibility study for the CDIA-funded Livable City program in Lao PDR. The background of this presentation stems from the terms of reference for the study, which suggests that the National Social Economic Development Plan of the Lao PDR provides a broad economic set of social and financial targets for specific proposals in the urban development sector, the strategic focus of which is infrastructure development, which rests and relies on improved connectivity in the East-West Economic Corridor, the provision of urban infrastructure, and the construction of main roads in districts and access roads that link rural productivity and rural production to urban markets. The central government has set up a policy framework for urban development where district authorities would be in a position to take the main role of city planning and implementation of these initiatives in order to foster improved urban growth and balanced human and economic development. And so the objective is to develop livable cities throughout the Lao PDR in order to have balanced economic development, inclusion, as well as sustainable urban growth, not only for now, but for also future residents. So, what is it that we mean when we speak about livable cities, and can infrastructure or physical planning alone deliver livability? Well, we know that through the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to create inclusive, competitive, and safe livable cities, inclusion from a social, economic, as well as human development point of view, but perhaps even connected physically. The cities must be competitive, not only within themselves, but amongst each other, not only in the Lao PDR, but the GMS region as well. So cities within Lao compete with cities in Vietnam, with Cambodia, with Thailand, and all of the countries that actually border uh, the Lao PDR. But more importantly, the idea that the cities have a resilience in an economic, social, and most importantly, an environmental perspective is necessary to ensure the sustainability of these cities for the future. So, in summary, there are five fundamental aspects of great livable cities that we've seen internationally, and those that we consider the most livable have the following five characteristics. First of all, they have robust and complete neighborhoods, which means that they're well planned, socially integrated, and economically connected or able to respond to the needs of their residents. Secondly, they ensure the accessibility and have a level of sustainable urban mobility, which means that there's a variety of means to actually move and get around within the cities. It's not just based on the automobile. There are a number of pedestrian routes, a number of cycle routes, and a number of alternative ways to move around the city. Thirdly, they have a diverse as well as resilient local economy. So the local economic context is not only connected to the skills and the strengths and the intellectual as well as labor capital of the people within the city, but also respond to the needs of other cities around them and serve not only as a demand for the goods and services that are produced in other cities around them, but can also serve those needs. Fourthly, there's a vibrant array of public spaces and parks, and that is absolutely essential to ensuring the green, safe, and socially inclusive nature of the cities. And finally, there has to be a level of affordability to all of the services that we're speaking about. The challenge then is to take some of these elements and develop livable cities in Laos. How do we actually do that? Well, we rely on the city level experience and the technical expertise, of course, which many well qualified Lao planners and engineers and social development specialists are exceptionally good at. But we also rely on international best practices, building on existing initiatives. Um, but more importantly, perhaps, is this new era and new way of thinking of actually involving the participation of people who these cities are going to benefit in the future. And that just doesn't mean big business and industries, but it also means key stakeholders from local NGOs, civil society organizations, and individual residents of the city. And this way we can harness local expertise and knowledge and understand more about the needs of the people which the city serves, not only now, but in the long run, in the next 20, 25, 30, maybe even 50 years. So the idea is that each of the three cities, Kaysone, Phomvihane, Pakse, and Luang Prabang, are stewards or owners of the infrastructure they will decide through the investments, and that the comprehensive range of physical and other plans, engineering infrastructure investments will be guided by the needs of the people. Thirdly, those who actually benefit from the city level investments now as well as in the future should be paying for the services. Fourthly, that opportunities should be addressed to provide infrastructure based more on partnerships and the needs of all people rather than just one sector of society. Fourthly, we need to consider um, how urban services are going to be provided in a manner that is sensitive to the evolving needs of communities, of societies, in a manner that responds to not only the environmental, social, and economic conditions that exist today, but those that will exist over the longer term, 20, 30, even 50 years. And finally, that every city faces a unique challenge and that the livability plans have to respond to the range of challenges that will exist and evolve over the next 20, 30, and 50 years. So what works in Luang Prabang today may not necessarily be the same solution that responds to its needs in the next 20 or 25 years. And in the same way that what works in Luang Prabang today may certainly not work for Pakse today. So there's different approaches for different cities, despite them being all in the same country. So, how does the livability plan guide the investments? Well, there's a number of ways, and immediately we can think of 6 ways. Firstly, it reduces transaction costs because what we're doing is we're saying that we're not only looking at infrastructure as an end in itself, we're looking to connect infrastructure to the larger trade flows between and across the cities within Lao as well as the GMS. Secondly, we want to enable the economic actors, the range of them, to respond to the new types of demands and connect users in different places. Thirdly, we want to lower the cost of inputs, not only for entrepreneurs for the purposes of job creation and economic growth, but also to respond to current and future industries. Fourthly, we want to create opportunities for employment, including in public works, and thereby we broaden the human capital base, the labor base, as well as the intellectual base of the city. And finally, we do that. In doing so, we have the opportunity to connect and improve city and regional environmental conditions, as well as the trade links, the physical links, the economic links through improved livelihoods, the health opportunities, and the reduced vulnerabilities of those that are most marginalized and within so what this cities. Does is actually try and develop levels of resilience, social resilience, as I mentioned, economic resilience, and resilience to environmental changes that will be brought about by climate change in the next 40, 50 years or so. So we need to connect resilience to livability through understanding the connections between these two components, between these two aspects, not only in environmental terms, but social and economic ones as well, and ensuring that the importance of building resilience into city investments will result in livability. So, for example, what is the impact of building a 50-meter wide road reserve versus a 35-meter wide road reserve, not only now, but in the future and during the rainy season as well. These all have implications that we need to consider. Uh, and then, fourthly, looking at the mechanisms for developing institutional resilience. Do we have a mindset that thinks about livability? Do we have a mindset within city planning and the city local authorities that thinks about what the future of each of these cities is going to be like in 20 or 30 years for our children and their children, and how do we build into the plans and the innovations and the engineering designs that we have innovations to respond to the needs of those cities, of the three cities in Lao PDR, um, to build future resilience into the infrastructure decisions that we make today. So these issues are going to actually be key for us. And so the suggestion is that rather than just look at the infrastructure investments and the engineering, that we look at urban concepts and the context that actually puts people first, that responds, as in the GMS projects that the ADB funds, cities as the engines of growth, that each of the cities within the GMS contributes economically and socially to the growth of the GMS, and that go beyond just the needs and the ability of the city to provide inputs, social, economic, and environmental ones, to the broader needs of the corridor, the agglomeration of cities within the particular country context. We also need to look at a complexity which builds the needs of hard infrastructure through softer systems and approaches and a way of thinking within city municipalities that goes beyond just building a road, providing a sewer pipe, building a solid waste management facility, for example, that is more focused on the needs of people, the needs of industry, the needs of society today, as well as in the future. And so we have people centered and people based planning that is deeply rooted in local needs, but understands the role of Lao and Lao cities in the GMS context as well as in the global context. These issues are key for ensuring improved livability. And so what we've tried to do is suggest an idea of livability without actually pinning it down. And you may ask me, Azim, what do you mean by livability? Well, there is no established definition of what livability is, but we know that there are some elements within livability that we could harness. It includes appropriate housing, supportive community features and services, and adequate mobility. And together, these facilitate personal independence, the growth of the individual, of the household, as well as society, and how these components interact within the broader context of cities, within government and decision makers at the city level to ensure a balanced and harmonious civic and social life for all residents within the three cities. So, this is a very philosophical approach to what livability is, but in very practical terms, what does it mean? Well, at the very bottom of this pyramid, which everyone is familiar with, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I've converted it into livability terms. So, if we look at the very bottom of the pyramid, we understand that there's a need to have and provide basic infrastructure and a tax base from the city. Further on from that, if we evolve slightly higher up the pyramid, we can see that there are safety needs and security needs that all cities provide a response to. But here's the challenge now for the three cities in Lao is to provide community partnerships going up the pyramid, local and regional access to services, further up the pyramid, providing a safe sense of place, local investments, opportunities to have education, to build a family, to have jobs, to have access to cultural inputs, theaters, cinemas, music concert venues, and so on. And then finally, to ensure that people, residents, households have a sense of social belonging to that city, that they have a sense of place, that they contribute locally as well as regionally to ideas of sustainability and building homes that they are proud of and can ensure contribute to the sustainability of the actual city. These are the challenges for planners and engineers that are much harder to articulate in physical investment plan. And so that's actually what we're trying to do with the city livability plans. We're trying to improve the coverage, quality, efficiency, and reliability of services in order to make them more energy efficient, gender responsive, socially and culturally exclusive, and affordable to all income groups, and more sustainable within the integrated development of what the city actually is through the building of capacities and systems. Secondly, we want to strengthen urban planning and financial sustainability by ensuring that these cities have a mechanism to actually pay for the investments that they have planned and want to achieve. And finally, we want to improve the urban environment and the context of the city to ensure that we can respond, for example, to climate resilience, to climate changes, through periods of seasonal flooding, through improved management, and through improved infrastructure, through enhancing resources, physical and technical, and the building of capacity over time. If we go to the next step, looking at some more practical approaches to improving city livability and relating this to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's a number of sustainable development goals that we can address through improving livability. SDG 3 talks about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all ages. SDG 11 talks about making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, and resilient. SDG 5 talks about achieving gender equality and empowering women and girls. SDG 13 talks about taking urgent action to combat climate change. And SDG 8 talks about promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. So let's take two of these as an example for the three cities. Let's take SDG 8 and SDG 13. SDG 8, reminder, talks about promoting inclusive, sustainable economic growth and employment and decent work for all. How can we ensure that in the three cities? Well, we can do it through protecting labor rights, promoting safe and secure working environments for all workers, and ensuring that women workers and those in precarious employment have some sense of social security. But you may say to me that, well, this is beyond the role of planning, investment, and engineering experts at the city level. And my response to that would be yes, but we need to now start thinking about those types of issues and developing cities, industrial parks that are healthy, that respond to the needs of the people working there, that create safe environments, that are well lit, that are better regulated, that are pollution free, and these are within the remits of engineers, planners, architects, and other specialists at the city level. We need to look at providing safer spaces for low income earners. We need to look at increasing the types of employment opportunities and the range of city management approaches that control and regulate industries to ensure that those industries are actually safe, less polluting, have certain levels of environmental health, safety, uh, conditions that responds to the needs of workers and protects workers, that we take particular notice of the role of the informal sector, and we have places that informal sectors can trade and do business, for example, night markets. And this is particularly true of all three of the cities. So there is a role that planners, engineers, and architects can play. In terms of SDG 13, which talks about urgent action to combat climate change, what can we do to strengthen resilience and improve the adaptive capacity of climate related hazards and natural disasters at the city level? And what can we do to integrate climate change measures into city level policies? Well, we can increase green spaces, we can improve air quality through planting trees, we can reduce energy consumption by making streets pedestrian and cycle friendly. We can reduce vehicle emissions and reduce car usage by making streets more pedestrian and cycle friendly, as I mentioned. We can ensure community cohesion is in place by providing open spaces more easily and accessible from key neighborhoods. So traditionally, planners, architects, engineers, and many city professionals that are assembled at today's workshop and are listening to this message have tended to focus on the bottom right quadrant, which is the physical improvements, without adequate or balanced regard for the social, institutional, or economic improvements to improving the ease of living index in Laos's intermediate cities. And my suggestion is that we have to take a balanced approach to look at the social, institutional, and economic considerations equally. And so this means that governance plays as much of a role in managing public open spaces as housing and wastewater management and solid waste management, for example, and that ensuring that people have a healthy, robust, diverse economy and adequate access to employment opportunities is just as critical as assured water and providing health and safety. You can see the cluster of areas in the red are ones that we've traditionally tended to focus on. The areas in green are further up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and these are areas that we also need to consider. The blue is the economic aspects, and I'm saying that all of these are connected through improved city level governance. And so through these combination of approaches, taking a whole city approach, we can we can have improved livability in each of the three cities. Specifically, I would like to mention five key areas that we need to adopt to take a whole city approach: urban planning policy for livability, number one. Number two, strengthening local urban and city governance and the institutions that manage cities. Three, improved partnerships and strengthening those partnerships. Four, looking at robust financing and implementation opportunities. And five, opportunities for urban innovation. You have this slide, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but I'd like to really address some of the five um, opportunities in each of these areas, or some of the opportunities in each of these areas that planners, engineers, and architects can really look at in developing improved livability in each of the city in each of the three cities within the program. Firstly, in urban planning policy, we need, as I mentioned, holistic and integrated approaches to enhance livability as opposed to a more siloed or sectoral approach that looks at improvements in specific sectors. We need cross-sectoral approaches. Within this, we need to mainstream the role of livability within the urban planning and infrastructure development and engineering frameworks that exist in terms of bylaws, codes, statutory planning regulations, and so on. So livability has to run through and across all of the sectors, not just looking at it as a sectoral basis. Thirdly, we need to promote locally contextualized solutions specific to the geographies, the social makeup, the cultural makeup, the economic diversity of each of the three cities. Um, the second key area is strengthening local urban governance, which is fundamental for us. And I know that the ministry is very much behind this type of idea. We need better interdepartment coordination. Planners and architects need to understand what finance is doing. Engineering needs to understand what social services is doing. And all of them need to understand what each other are doing in order to have a whole city approach and improved responsiveness to the needs of city stakeholders, both the private sector as well as individual households. We need to showcase this good track record through improved engagement to encourage stakeholders to actually have a voice and in what their city investments are going to be, and thereby they have ownership of specifically funded initiatives, and meaning that with improved ownership, we have better payment for these types of services, and that takes us to the next level of financial and implementation, self-sufficiency, and sustainability, meaning that the investments that we choose today will be financially self-sustaining at some point in the future because they are locally owned, locally managed, decided, and prioritized by the stakeholders who they are meant to benefit. We also want to look at developing a range of capacities in cities to have less of a reliance on ministry funding and ministry support and more internal reliance on the opportunities for self-sustaining and self-prioritized investments through a range of opportunities, including public-private partnerships. Finally, we want to look at improving the systems and having urban innovation drive and manage certain systems so that we have uh, more people-centric urban planning and design. We have improved land management through automation of systems, improved revenue generation and property tax bills, improved levels of collection and enforcement, and improved maintenance of infrastructure and assets. So in these ways, I believe that, just to summarize, um, the types of resilience we're looking at are not only physical resilience and resilience to climate change, environmental resilience, but also social and economic resilience. It's for these reasons that I'm suggesting that planners and architects and engineers involved in the program look beyond just the mere selection of infrastructure investments for today. We look at the needs for tomorrow, not only just what city managers need, but also responsive to what the actual stakeholders at the city level, civil society, households, industry, academic institutions, training organizations need in order to create longer term, vibrant, inclusive, and sustainable cities to ensure that these are the building blocks for what makes livable cities for Lao in the future. I'm going to stop here and conclude that as part one of this presentation, and future parts will be following. I'd like to now try and address some of the more practical aspects of improved livability by referring back to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which Laos is signatory to. We know that in terms of developing livable, inclusive, and resilient cities, there's specifically 5 SDGs that can be addressed. SDG 3 talks about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all at all ages. SDG 11 talks about making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. SDG 5 talks about achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. SDG 13 talks about taking urgent action to climate change rather. SDG 8 talks about promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. And you may be asking, that as engineers, planners, architects, and other types of finance specialists at the city level, what is our role in this? And my response is, your role is very, very critical because there's a role to play by city planners, architects, engineers, and finance specialists in developing livable, inclusive, and resilient cities and responding to the SDGs. For example, let me just take two of the SDGs to illustrate the point. In terms of SDG 8, to promote inclusive, sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all, we know that in many of Laos cities, including the 3 that are part of this program, there's a need to protect and promote labor rights and promote safe and secure working environments for all workers, including migrant workers, in particular women, and in particular those in precarious or informal employment. This means that in the industrial parks in Savannakhet, for example, there's a need for ensuring that low-income earners have a safe place to live, that their working conditions are safe, that levels of pollution are controlled, that health, safety, and environmental regulations are followed, and that the opportunities for informal employment and informal workers have wide sidewalks, they have exclusive vendor spaces and parks, they have opportunities to sell their wares and earn a living and ensure their livelihoods at transit stations. They have improved opportunities to use non-vehicular, non-motorized transport, and that they can ensure healthy and safe work practices through the adoption and protection by city management. If we look at SDG 13, which considers the need to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts, we know that there's opportunities, firstly, to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters, and that city managers and technical specialists have to integrate climate change into city-level policies, strategies, and planning environments. This means that we need to increase green spaces, improve air quality, reduce energy consumption, and we can do all of those things through planting more trees, providing more parks, and ensuring that there are more pedestrian and cycle routes throughout each of the 3 cities. We know that by reducing vehicle emission and reducing car usages, we can uh, have improvements in climate change and take into consideration the SDG commitments that Laos has made to the United Nations. We can do this through making streets more pedestrian and cycle friendly, and improving access to public spaces and public markets. So those are just two of the examples that I'd like to cite. In terms of the role that we have as planners, architects, engineers, and finance specialists, we've tended to focus on the bottom right quadrant of this slide, which is the physical improvements, because that's what technically we've been trained in. But I'm suggesting that to ensure livability, we also now need to consider the social, institutional, and economic aspects of what it is that we do, because livability cannot be attained by just manipulating the physical environment. We have to consider the social context, the institutional context, as well as the economic one. And if we look at this next slide, our role as planners, architects, engineers, and finance specialists have been mostly constrained, historically at least, to the red areas. So we like to do what we know best, and what we know best is responding to pollution, wastewater, land use, housing, public open space, solid waste management, water, power supply, and transportation. But those alone are not adequate to ensure livability in the project context. We need to also consider the green areas, safety and security, health, education, identity, cultural amenities. And all of these have to be tied together through the blue and orange areas. That is economy and employment and governance. We cannot achieve livability just by, in isolation, addressing any one of these areas. We have to take a whole city approach. And our role as planners, architects, and engineers has traditionally been confined to the physical and technical areas. But what I'm suggesting is that we need to take a more broader and balanced approach to addressing all of the areas if we want to see some of the livability benefits that I've suggested in these slides. So there's a need to look at 5 sectors, and each of these have a horizontal relationship with the other. So urban planning connects to improved local governance capacities, connects to strengthening the partnerships that exist at the city level, connects to improved finances and implementation abilities, connects to improved urban innovation. And through connecting all of these areas, which are not confined to just one sector or one technical discipline, we can expect to see results in more complete neighborhoods, number one. Number two, more accessible and sustainable ways of moving around the city by people, by industries as well. Number three, uh, diverse and resilient local economy built on the strengths of people. Number four, vibrant public spaces. And number five, underpinning all of this is affordability. So, in practical terms, before I conclude this section, I just want to look at in each of these areas what we can really do as city planners. In each of the cities that you come from, there's a need to take a holistic approach to enhance livability rather than a sectoral approach. We can't do this piecemeal. We can't do it just by developing physical plans or infrastructure engineering designs or investment plans. We need to look at all of that as a whole. We need to go beyond infrastructure and look at a people-centric approach. The role of infrastructure is to serve the needs of the people. We need to ask ourselves, what are the needs of the people now? What will they be in 15, 20, or 25 years? And even what can they be in 50 years? And that will allow us to develop contextualized solutions that respond to the current geographical, social, economic, and cultural needs of the city. Area two looks at strengthening local urban governance. We need clear mandates, more interdepartmental coordination, improved governance to look at opportunities that go beyond the connectivity of just uh, departments and how these departments at the city level connect to the needs of people, of industries, and of other stakeholders such as non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations so that we can understand what the needs are and develop relevant, contextualized solutions to the needs and aspirations of the various city stakeholders. Thirdly, in terms of financing and implementation, we need to look at how to strengthen the role of finance within cities. This is very underutilized and underrepresented at the city level because there's a tendency to rely on the ministry for funding and support. Well, we need to look at a broader set of opportunities that make the cities more self-reliant, self-sustainable from a financial point of view, and more in charge of their own future rather than reliant on ministerial funding and support. And that relies on the need to forge new partnerships and look at concrete action for a way forward. One opportunity is to look at PPPs, public-private partnerships, but there's other opportunities to involve non-governmental and non-state agencies in driving infrastructure and investment solutions to respond to the needs of city stakeholders that we've understood through the first two areas that I've discussed. Finally, connecting all of this is using innovation and information communication technology to tie it all together. Can we systematize processes to rely less on individuals, allowing individuals to concentrate more on consultation and engagement? Can we systematize land management, systematize revenue generation, and ensure that property tax bills and collection are more automated, that operational and routine systems are more automated rather than reliant on individuals, and allow individuals to concentrate on the engagement with entrepreneurs, the private sector, research institutions, and community and civil society groups to develop solutions and innovations that respond to increased resilience, social, economic, as well as environmental, thereby resulting in dividends for improved livability. And these are the relationships between resilience and livability that I wanted to talk about in this first section. The next section is going to look at some of the regional and global examples of what happens when you don't have resilience and why this need for livability underscores all of the investments that CDIA wants you to consider in your investments for the multi-tranche finance facility.